Discover how smarter project insights can lead to better project outcomes.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always great to have you with us. I am happy to be here again. Dale, how are you, my friend?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Another week, another fantastic guest. They just keep coming, Val. I think we are the luckiest two project professionals in the world. We get to do this every week. How have you been?
Fantastic, mate. Fantastic. Took the team out yesterday. We actually were allowed out, so COVID is slowly passing in Australia, which is fantastic. And I was able to sit at a restaurant and have an actual dinner, which I never used to appreciate, but now I do.
Very nice, very nice. I'm very, very happy for you that it's opening up, and I see your borders are opening up as well. So maybe we'll pop over for a visit at some stage.
Yes.
But before we do that, we got to get into this podcast and welcome Mr. Richard Newey. Welcome, Richard. Good to have you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Good, good. Are you raring to go? Are you all set?
Yeah, I'm all set. I've got wine on ready to go. So yeah, what more do I need?
Fantastic. I'm joining you on the other end with a scotch. So there we are.
Yeah, okay.
But no, you know what? Yeah, cheers to that. You've picked a fantastic topic because, one, I love sport. Val will tell you that. You clearly love sport, specifically your endurance sport, Richard. And how that relates to risk. And you've had a very, very successful and illustrious career in risk as well. So this is going to be a hugely fascinating conversation. Well, at least for me. And I'm sure many other listeners too. But before we jump straight into the topic, we always love just to get a little brief background of how you actually fell into risk. Because when you speak to generally a lot of project professionals, we fall into the control space, etc. But risk specifically, what attracted you to risk management?
I guess a few years ago, I did an MBA, which opened a few doors. And originally I didn't think risk would be the area to go in, but my background has been working for main contractors back 20 years ago, early days on site. And that does make you very solution focused in getting things done and overcoming problems. And I think for contractors, that's what I did. And I was used in that context. So then when you look at risk, and when I moved into that arena, I just found it quite fascinating, actually, in terms of being the person that could make a difference. And that was the key thing. I think my early forays in terms of risk, I wasn't too impressed, let's say, but with the relative risk maturity at that time, anyway.
What was it about the maturity? If we can just pause there and share some of the demons, I guess, or borrowing from Iron Cams and the ghosts.
I think, well, it's still prevalent today in some areas, but certainly 16 years ago, people were more worried whether a risk was scored a 2 or a 3 than really was the risk correct? Was it properly described? Could we do something about it? And were we really driving and underpinning decision making? My first forays, it wasn't that at all. It was people more worried about risk models with numbers of decimal points, etc. And people seem to miss the point. And I thought that was quite a good opportunity to do something a little bit different. I'm sure others were doing things differently as well. And risk has certainly matured over the last 15 years, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think it's along with, sort of the other controls disciplines as well. We're still, I think, we're still learning and we're still growing, we're still maturing, but I think you're right. It has come a long way, certainly. Anyway, let's get into it. So endurance sports or events, what do you do in the endurance space, or what don't you do? That's probably the easier question to ask. You do everything by the sounds of it.
Well, not all at the same time. To be clear, I've tended to follow a bit of a path from climbing, which actually led to try Everest back in 2000. And then that moved into ultra endurance cycling, race across America, Ironman events, and then more recently ultra running. So, but I'm not doing all at the same time. No, that would be a bit silly, wouldn't it?
And what attracts you to endurance events specifically? Because it takes, I mean, those that I know, I've the most I've ever done is the London Duathlon in Richmond Park, right?
Okay.
And that's nothing compared to what you've done. But the training just for that event, personally, it takes a lot of time. It takes a toll. Is it something that you were just naturally gifted at, that you sort of just drew towards, or what was the attraction?
I wouldn't say I'm naturally gifted, no. I've worked at it, but the attraction, I think, for me, is finding the edge, the limit of what you think is physically achievable. And certainly in my experience, what you think is achievable is nowhere near actually what is achievable. You can certainly go way beyond that. So I find that quite fascinating. And certainly the events I go into, when you get through that first section where everybody's trying and you're trying to save seconds and minutes here, but then when you're a few days into it, and then it's really about going through the process and the whole mental aspect. I enjoy the mental aspects and how you deal with the suffering, and you deal with those problems that you face with to get through it, really, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. The trials and tribulations, I guess, from a sports perspective, they either break you down or make you stronger. And it's how you actually use that to build on. And I guess if I may try and draw the first parallel to projects, we have a lot of trials and tribulations and projects as well. And I was thinking about it before, we sort of got together tonight, and what are some of the parallels I thought of when it comes just in general to sports and particularly risks. And there's a lot of risks that professional athletes actually take, or actually just, you don't have to be professional. Any athlete that does sports, if you don't train properly, if you don't take the correct nutrition, if you don't prepare and plan properly for the actual event, things could go horribly wrong. And that finish line is like that delivery, that final delivery of the project, I guess, and it's all about de-risking. But listen, you are here as the professional. What made you pick the parallels between endurance sports and risk?
Because when you do something, an endurance sport, it makes you simplify what you need to do to achieve success. You know what you need to do to achieve success, so therefore you need to understand what are the risks to prevent you doing that. It's not about getting into the little detail. There are details, and often in our profession, we get lost in that detail without focusing on the things that really make a difference to you. So I guess that I find quite fascinating. And I've got some examples in something like, should I talk about the race across America? Should I talk about that as a good example?
Yeah.
And for those that don't understand or don't know what that event is, so that's been going for about 35 years. And when I raced it, which was in 2009, I think at that stage only about 150 people had finished. 2 people from the UK had finished, everybody else had failed. So this is an event racing across America on a bike, 3,000 miles, you've got 12 days. So it's continuous. And when the clock starts, it starts and it ends in Annapolis on the east coast of America. So when you finish. So for an event like that, you need to understand what it is about that that's going to potentially drive success, and then how you can manage that. And a big part of that is the mental aspects, of course. So I think trying to keep things simple in that context, understanding that given 70% of the field won't finish. So that, I guess at the outset, understanding what is your own risk appetite, how much are you going to roll the dice, how risk averse are you going to be, and that informs your strategy for the race. So for me, in that context, I was a bike racer at the time, and I wasn't a professional bike racer by any means, but I was pretty good, let's say. And I wanted to race it. But I used a sports psychiatrist, and once we understood what the race was about and how to drive success, we just kept it simple. So for the first 1,800 miles of the race, all I had to do, bearing in mind I had a support team, and the support team who were giving me nutrition and such like, and forgive me, this sounds a little bit of a silly thing to say, but all I had to do was get on my bike and ride 300 miles a day, get off my bike, sleep for an hour and a half, get back on the bike, ride 300 miles. And if you keep it simple, that makes it so much easier to do that. And then about 1,800 miles into the race, okay, you're not guaranteed to finish, but you've got a big chunk of it out of the way. And then at that stage, and in this example, we got to Mississippi Bridge. People had overtaken me. I didn't know where I was in the race. Nobody told me anything. All I did was ride 300 miles. The crew didn't tell me anything. At Mississippi Bridge, they sat me down and said, okay, so this is the situation. I think I was 50 people had started. I was 11th at this stage. There's only 12 left. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea, because you don't see people drop out. Yeah. But then once I knew I was in 11th and we had only 1,200 miles to go, which sounds a bit of a silly thing to say, appreciated, but then the mindset switched to racing. And then we did race the last 1,200 miles, whereas everybody else had been racing from the outset, and mentally I was quite fresh. And I loved it, the last 1,200 miles. And it was hard. Let's be clear, it was very hard, with hallucinations and all sorts, but risk informs your strategy, and we sometimes miss that, I think. Certainly for organisations, understanding what your risk appetite is often gets missed. I think many organisations, they write their strategy, then think about the risk to their strategy, and I think in a sporting context, you think about it much more.
Yeah, no, that's very valid. If I can just pause there slightly and rewind, because you mentioned it a couple of times, you alluded to it. Well, one, you said you spoke to a sports psychiatrist.
Yeah.
You spoke about sort of your mental freshness towards the end, when you're physically obviously quite exhausted. Do we do enough to prepare ourselves on these mega complex projects in terms of how mentally well we are going into projects? Because I feel like maybe we should have a project psychiatrist session potentially, and not only before but during, maybe even after, maybe not psychiatrist, but something of that ilk to help us cope with all of the various pressures that we have. Is that something that you see that would help?
Well, potentially, certainly. And I use the sports psychiatrist. So I would look at different scenarios, but this is before the race. We looked at different scenarios and how I would feel in that situation and the signs that I would emit, and then what the crew could do about it. And more importantly, okay, I've probably got an easy job in this situation. I've just got to ride the bike. The crew have to feed me, give me nutrition, deal with a stroppy cyclist who's massively fatigued, and they've got to drive an RV and 2 vehicles, and there's only 8 of them, 3,000 miles also, and I did it in 10 days, the race. So they've got to do all that and look after me, and they get sleep deprived. And you need to understand emotionally, how do they cope with that, and the risks on them. And indeed, one of the reasons why round riders don't finish is there's a number of key reasons, but you have a follow vehicle behind you all the time, and one of the problems is you get run over, and you get run over because your driver in the follow vehicle falls asleep, and then he runs over his round rider, which isn't ideal, is it? And also, that's normally that occurs, that's guys, because at the start of the race, us guys are full of ego. Yeah, we don't need sleep, etc. Well, that's okay for a night, but 2 nights in, it does have an effect. So without wishing to stereotype, women are better in that situation. They have less ego. So therefore, actually, you probably want a female driver following you in the early stages of the race, because they're less likely to run you over. Thankfully, nobody ran me over. But anyway, certainly in a construction perspective, and I guess coming off the, where we are now with COVID and the way of mental health, I think it does have a place, actually. It'd be interesting to see how that manifests moving forwards, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about well-being these days. In many organizations, I can see it being spoken about, and you get well-being champions and you get social value leads these days. I've seen being advertised by certain companies, and sometimes I think, is it only something that they're paying lip service to, or do they really care about it? As you say, in sports, it's like almost, specifically the sports you are doing, it's almost a non-negotiable that you need to have it, and not just to have it, but actually because it adds real value. And maybe yet we haven't realized what that value actually is to projects yet, because it's been such a, I guess, as you say, male-dominated industry where it's all about just get shit done, man up type thing.
Yeah.
And perhaps that is, we slowly starting to break that mold, and rightfully so.
But I don't think risk is male dominated.
Oh yeah,
for sure. I think some of the best risk managers out there, in my experience, are females, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you're right when it comes to risk. I was just thinking in terms of industry specific. I mean, you look at construction, generally speaking, engineers, it's amazing we're getting more diversity in now. But if you look historically, I think just the culture that we've, I guess, inherited from past has been sort of this sort of, you got to be macho in it. But I think you're right. We are breaking that, which is fantastic, and this is why we need to talk about it more. But enough from me. I'm going to bring Val in there, because he's been sitting in the background looking at me talking absolute nonsense, going, Dale, what the hell are you talking about? Val, what do you think about all this?
I'm used to hearing you, Dale. No, it's good. I was listening. I'm very actually interested in the endurance side of these things and how we're roping in into projects. And I wanted to get back into the mindset, because I think that's a really, as you said, it's a really important piece. And it's funny because I know a few people who do ultra endurance type events who are in risk. And I'm wondering if there's some correlation there. But before I do, I wanted to know, they say the first part of the leg, or the first leg of the race, is it's all about the physical endurance. And then they say the second leg of the race is all about mental endurance. And I wonder, from your perspective, Richard, what is mental endurance from your, how do you push when the body's given up? How do you, and I understand you simplify things and you just keep it, a 300 mile a day or whatever it is. That's a great small milestone. But when you're on that bike, what goes through your head, and how do you keep pushing?
Well, these days I'm running ultramarathons. I think in that context, and I did a race in the summer, and I do quite a lot of yoga. So I do a lot of Ashtanga yoga, and really staying present. It's really easy in these, I guess it's true in construction as well, that we get ahead of ourselves, but really staying present on what you have to do at that moment. When you go into an aid station, you need to charge your watch, you need to charge your phone, you need to eat, you need to sleep for an hour and go, and you just need to be present on what you need to do then. You don't need to worry about what you're doing in 2 days, or think about the finish of the race, or think about things. And it's, you just need to stay in with that. In the bike race, going back to RAM, there's 3 key reasons why people pull out. One of them I've already mentioned. You have an accident, whether it's your own team. Saddle sores are a big issue. That becomes excruciating. So I had saddle sores at 1,000 miles. Had to deal with those. And the other is something called Sherman's neck. So when you're on a bike, as you know, your head is quite heavy. and you're in a position that is putting quite a load on your neck. And after about 1,500 miles in the race, I couldn't hold my head up anymore. So in other words, I couldn't see where I was going. And to me, I think people would pull out, and people do pull out because of that. I just saw it as, okay, how do we overcome this? How do I find a solution? And I did find a solution. It's not the safest solution in the world. I could see the road for about 100 meters and then my head would drop. But sometimes you just find a way to dig deep. And the whole mental games that goes along with that as well. I don't know if I've described that particularly well, but...
No, you have. I mean, it's great to hear this, because I don't think a lot of listeners see this side of the ultra marathon. And I think the mindset, particularly on projects as well, can be the same. You can be in a project, working night and day, trying to get things done. And I've always seen this in projects where you have, especially the push towards a particular milestone, you have these heroic efforts. And obviously when you're pushing and you're fatigued, the risk increases. Is that right?
Yeah, but that makes it more enjoyable in a way. And sometimes when you're in the middle of the night and you're in the Alps running, those are the moments, aren't they? Now, how that applies in a construction context, I'm not sure. But I guess when you do have successes in a project, and milestones along the way, they're fabulous, and we forget all the trials and tribulations that have gone into that. And certainly, I think just really enjoying the successes is fabulous. But I do use mental games to try and stay positive. If I'm running, or sometimes when you're late in these races, there's not a lot of running going on. You're just going as fast as you can. I've been known to catch someone, fall asleep for 10 minutes on a path, set an alarm, get up again, catch them again, do the same thing, and did it twice, and then you catch them again and you keep going, just because you need the sleep. And when you're massively sleep deprived, you do what you need to do to keep going, but you also have in the back of your mind, you're competitive and you're a racer and you're trying to do the best you can. So
yeah, there's something to say about the rewards of doing or completing something and the suffering that goes along with it. And there's some schools of thought that think that suffering is actually part of the achievement or the accomplishment, because when you finished it, if it was easy, the recognition or the contribution would not be as great or grand, and the feeling wouldn't be there. So there's some sense of meaning and purpose and contribution. And when you get to the end and you've had a grueling project or endurance race, you're like, I did it. I stuck it out. I did all the hard work, and we made it. We ticked it off. So I think there's some real parallels there. You mentioned mind games. How silly are these mind games? Can you tell us a little bit about
that? Well, in RAM, when you get sleep deprived, in that race over 10 days, I had 19 hours sleep, to put it in context.
Wow.
So not much sleep at all. And at the end of the race, road signs were coming alive as vampires. So I was riding down the middle of the road, and my support team, they just carried on along with that line. Yeah, they're vampires, just ride faster. So in that context, but you just need to you play whatever games you can, little chunks to keep going.
Yeah. I think as well, as you said, little milestones or achievable things that you can do, thinking small, or start small, think big type things, really do help when you're on those long distance events. Back to projects though, I think as well, we just talked about well-being, and I just wanted to comment on well-being, because I find that the difficult projects are the ones that I remember, and the people that I work with on the hardest projects are the ones I stay closest to. And I think there's something around, a balance of well-being, obviously, and lifestyle, which, people have got kids and families. We don't want to encroach on that. But I think by design, projects need to be a little bit hard, and they are. And a lot of the time, you don't finish the work that you need to within the 9 to 5 window. It does take a little bit of extra effort. I am seeing, though, that in some cases, some generations not so much interested in after hours work. And I used to say you can never achieve the good things between 9 to 5. All the fun stuff happens after. And I was really talking about the informal networks, having a beer with the engineers to get things done, having a chat with your seniors early in the morning, have a coffee to get things kind of moving. From a risk perspective, though, how do you balance that off? Because you don't want people to be burning out, which does happen on projects a lot. You don't want people to be suffering or having issues at home. What's your advice to anyone listening who has a difficult workload but is trying to manage it within a period of 9 to 5?
Focus on the things that make a difference. I'm certainly in a risk environment. We get embroiled in doing things. Risk registers that have got numerous risks on there. Risk models where people are concerned, where they've run a risk model and it comes to a number of decimal places, when the inputs to that are essentially they're just guesswork. They're guesswork based on a degree of rigor, let's say. So I think sometimes we get too embroiled in the whole process of doing it, rather than the things that actually will make a difference and underpin decisions in a project. So certainly as a risk professional, I think that's really important. And also as individuals, certainly in risk, knowledge is power. So focus on the things, make yourself to a point where you know more about what's going on than anyone else. And sometimes that can be the things after 5, but you can do that in a 9 to 5 context, I think.
And just because you mentioned it, risk registers are a favorite of mine, and they are somewhat of a bat to wield and shield, if you like, in a commercial context. And I'm wondering, how do we, even in an endurance sport, because I think risk is a marathon, not a sprint. As you said, you've got to articulate the inputs, get the right quality of information, provide informed principles so that we can make decisions on risk in the future, because effectively these are things that could happen. And I think a lot of the time the inputs are skewed by biases. This is slightly off endurance, but it's important. How do you go about getting a robust risk register?
Well, I like to keep it simple at the outset. I like to think it goes back to what I was saying from the sporting context. What really drives and underpins success on a project, and therefore, what are the things that will impact upon those from a risk perspective? What are the key things that might go wrong? Or indeed, in risk, there's also opportunities as well. Let's not forget that. What are the causes of that, and what are the mitigations of that? And we do overcomplicate it sometimes, but risk is one of those disciplines that it's really easy to do risk badly and really hard to do it well. So I think it's trying to, less is more is often true, and describing it well, and pictorially mapping registers. If it's an existing register, mapping it to objectives is really powerful, and linking risks in a mind map. I think that's really powerful to demonstrate that it's not always about cost and time. There's other objectives that also we need to focus from a risk perspective.
Yeah, you said something before that I wrote down. Risk informs your strategy. I think for those that didn't pick that up, I think that was a really nice bit of insight, because I think you're right. And it brings me to this story that I heard or read somewhere, Richard, about the UK cycling team and a guy called David Brailsford, who looked at, I think he was a performance director, British cycling team never won a Tour de France at the time, or not for a long time, or something like that. And he was looking at the system as a whole, right? The whole bike, the performer, the apparel that they wear, the way that they train, their mindset. And he was making what he called 1% changes. So a slight change here, a slight change there, a slight change there. And obviously those 1% marginal gains compounded. And obviously they won a few on the way. And I love that idea, or that concept of, risk is not a vertical. It's actually a horizontal. It informs your strategy, but it's also integrated with your time, your cost, your quality, how we deliver things, how we think about the future. It's actually a very important integrated part. And I feel like sometimes it isn't taken seriously. It's taken as a box ticking exercise, or something that we need to manage with the client, rather than a tool for informed decisions about how we can better safeguard the future, or protect our assets, or our people. And one of the things I thought was really cool was this 1% marginal gain concept, thinking as a part of the whole, rather than just an individual department or person. Because the risk teams are not very big, are they? Usually it's one person trumpeting, risk, the champion of risk. And I think from that perspective, it's also an endurance sport. I can see you smiling there. So you're usually just one man or one woman band talking about how valuable risk is. And sometimes you're confronted with challenges on that. From your perspective, I've got two questions, and maybe I'll hand over to Dale. But the first one is, how do you deal with that contention, particularly when risks are not agreed upon, when you've got difference of opinions, or maybe you've got difference of commercial appetite to take on the risks or declare the risks? That was my first question. The second one is, how can we make some marginal improvements to integrated risk amongst our team, so that everyone takes it as a responsibility, a bit like safety, as an example?
Yeah. Well, let's answer the second question first. And I guess the parallel there with what Brailsford did with British cycling, all those marginal gains are opportunities that was a very holistic approach to looking at how they could improve, and how they could maximize those opportunities and bring to fruition. How could they actually get them signed off by the UCI, keeping them secret from other teams, Australians in particular, I think, back in the early days of British cycling. So I think that sometimes thinking at the opportunities is particularly pertinent, as opposed to the negatives. As a risk advocate, we're always drawn into, we're the negative people, but I think we are the people that make a difference, and should be viewed, along with the project director and the commercial manager, as the most important people on a given project. Now, that's not always the case, but I think the risk person is the person that probably drinks too much coffee, finds out what's really going on, and then really drives and informs those risks. So I'm certainly the people that I employ. I don't want shrinking violets that are just going to accept what people may say. We want people that are going to really understand what the risk is on a project, and really act as risk consultants. So they go into a project, they understand what the key risks are on Olympic Games, for example. They're not being told what they are. They've done the research, they've got that background, etc. I think that covers the second question. Just remind me the first one. A long time ago now.
I think Val's actually dropped off with his internet there. But we'll let him come back on and ask you when he does rejoin. Okay. He's having trouble with the internet there, Richard. But I'll keep going, because I like this strand around, specifically if I think about equipment when it comes to sports, and focusing on the actual sports equipment. Now, when we're talking about equipment, it's not just the bike or the shoes. It's like, okay, you actually have to wear Lycra now, because over, hundreds and thousands of miles, the Lycra helps you, those split little seconds all add up. And so I'm not. Is
this from personal experience?
No, I've seen races on TV. I see how it goes. In South Africa, the Ironman South Africa is from my hometown in Port Elizabeth. Now known. Have you? Okay, great, fantastic. Yeah. It's now known as Iberga. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
That's not,
We won't go there.
anymore. I'm not suggesting that everyone comes into the office on projects in Lycra, but I was thinking, what is the equipment that we should be looking at? Because I've often heard like, oh, okay, we just need P6, not considering what it interacts with. And maybe this is a selfish bias view from a control standpoint. I'm going, okay, how does that interact with your risk register? And then how does that interact with your cost management system? How does that interact with everything else that you have around you? You know, and I feel like that's the equipment we should be looking at that makes the project go faster, smoother, quicker, more efficiently, delivers safer, etc., etc. And if we pay the due respect to the equipment that we need to use to deliver the project, and indeed also the human equipment, the human resources to deliver it, then I feel like that is attention well spent based on what we're talking about when it comes to sport.
Well, sport's obviously maturing as well. We mentioned Ironman as an example. When I was racing Ironman, certainly in the early days, you bought the best helmet that you could, and you spent quite a lot of money on your Lycra skin suit, and you bought the best bike, but that didn't necessarily mean you had the fastest position, etc. And what people do now is they go on a velodrome with somebody that's got an algorithm to work out your drag coefficient, and you can have the best helmet, but it may not be the best helmet for you. So they chop and change your position, chop and change your helmet, change different shoes can make a difference, and they get you get your lowest drag coefficient for the power that you can hold, etc. I guess the parallel there is that they're looking at it holistically of what is the best overall for that particular individual and therefore project. So therefore in construction and in risk and controls, we want something that holistically everything's going to tie together and it's going to be the best solution. It may not be the best risk modeling out there. That might be some unique product, but ideally you want a piece of software that does it all, that talks to you, and you don't need to export out of it to run a QSRA or a cost model. It's all integrated and you get the answers that you want, and you can do it with a degree of rigor such that it can be challenged and you understand it. I think that's really important moving forwards. And there's products out there that talk about that and say they can do it. And I'm not going to name names, but some of them are really clunky. They're not fast enough, etc.
You can name names if you want to.
Yeah, go for it. I was going to say.
Yeah, well,
feel free.
Well, I think, look, at AECOM, we've invested in Innate recently, and I've not used the product yet. I talked to the guys at the Controls Expo, and I think that's a really great opportunity, not just on major global programs, but also on much smaller projects where you can use it. And I see that's moving away from Excel spreadsheets and at risk, and we're going to use P6 here, and we're going to use PRA or Safran, etc. I see it as much more integrated moving forwards, for sure.
No, so I have seen Innate's product basis, and it's absolutely amazing. I think Val, you've seen it as well and used it a bit. I mean,
yeah,
you probably didn't know, Richard, but Innate's actually one of our main sponsors on the podcast as well. We've got a good relationship with them, and you know, it is truly amazing, their product. It's a great product. But as you say, you know, drawing the parallels between having the right equipment or the best equipment, but not necessarily, you know, knowing how to use it. You know, the good old saying, you know, all the gear and no idea sprung to mind for me as well.
Yeah.
So you could have the all singing, all dancing equipment, whether you're delivering a project or riding a bike, but if you actually don't know how to use it, so that's where the whole, I guess, capability comes in. An education piece on how we deliver better, more efficient, and use equipment to our best ability. But hey, we got Val back. Val, two questions you asked before you lost connectivity, Richard was answering the second one. So we'd wait for you to come back, which you have now, and re-ask the first one. Do you remember what it was?
No.
Well, we'll scrap that then.
Neither do I.
But I have another one.
Okay.
I was just wondering, because could you imagine then, when we have people come into projects, if we wanted to, could we perform a drag coefficient on people in projects and really set them up for success, right? So I'm not saying in a discriminatory way. I'm actually saying, like, okay, so because certain people perform better under pressure. I know, actually, I don't mind working harder and a little bit later. And there's certain times when I'm really, really good. Like I get in flow probably around the 10, 11 after a wine, Richard, but I can really get into like some serious work or writing documents or doing some process work, whatever it is. Could we do the same thing? What's the drag coefficient for everybody? If we looked at marginal gains and we looked at the system as a whole and we looked at everyone as a contributing part of that, surely there would be some way to, and I don't think we need a sports psychologist or psychiatrist, but we need some way of maybe defining it for every single person. If a project is a unique endeavor, then it's unique for everybody, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
So I think you're right. We're not going to do drag coefficients, however, but I think some of the things that we miss are, and we train people, it's certainly in risk, for example, we train people on qualitative and quantitative. We end up with some of the best models out there. But what sets people apart is communication. How do they communicate? How do they communicate that to a client such that they can inspire, motivate, really drive and underpin decision-making? How can they produce a report that is to the point and succinct, that isn't full of flowery words, but really drives it forwards? How do people present and facilitate? Those are the things that often make a difference. So that's certainly where I focus on the things that other people perhaps miss. We try and focus on those areas. So you're trying to get to develop people to be really rounded professionals. And we certainly in my team, we do invest an awful lot in training. And I do look laterally, and we do look at, okay, well, where does this person need to develop, etc. And I think that's certainly borne fruit in terms of many of the awards we've been shortlisted for in the last 2 years. I think been shortlisted as a risk team through this pandemic, something like 15 risk awards, which I think is fabulous for those involved that have been shortlisted. Yeah, that's brilliant, and it makes a difference, and it raises their confidence. And some of that is about bringing in young, bright people that perhaps don't have risk or construction experience, but already have some of those skills. And it's all about building effective teams in a way.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I had one more, because you were talking about it being effective and how risk has to inform our future and our strategy. What about ESG? These big buzzwords around environment and sustainability, and how projects, contribute to carbon and their footprint as we build them, right? I mean, the construction industry in particular, we do have a responsibility. We've had some great guests on the podcast for Dale, and we've talked about sustainability, but not the integration between that and the risk offset. So there's always a risk when you're doing new things or novel things. We know this, and that might mean some emergent practices. The way we do construction might be different because we're trying to be more, I guess, aware of the environmental impacts. Have you dabbled in that space yet?
We have dabbled, because many projects now, one of their objectives is around the whole carbon neutrality and environmental impact. So whilst cost, time and quality are important, we should also be considering risks in those areas. And also, I would say, actually, opportunities much more. So how can we maximize opportunities in those areas for a project? So when we're reporting risk to a board, you might have the top 3 or 4 might be along the lines that I just described in terms of cost, time, quality, but we shouldn't be afraid to bring those risks up or those opportunities up. Certainly, if I'm presented to a board of 10 risks, why not have 2 or 3 opportunities in there that perhaps are around the whole environmental agenda.
Yeah,
we have the opportunity to make a difference, don't we? So
we do.
Why not?
We do.
Why
Absolutely.
not drive it?
100%. And you actually reminded me of something else as well, because I used to remember risk registers. They didn't call them risk registers. We just had threats and opportunities. I can't remember what they called it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, when they think about risks, they sometimes connotate that with negative or impacts that will damage the project, but they forget about the opportunities. And I felt like, at least in my experience, we trained well for risk in most projects. That was really important. But we don't train as heavy, perhaps, or maybe the right methods for opportunity. And you mentioned when you were writing, you had these mind games to keep yourself positive. And I imagine that's really important. You don't want to get into a negative rut and freak out when you see vampires. You want to be positive and be playful, right? You want to have a bit of fun on the long. How do we, or do you know your experience, how do we emphasize more on the opportunity piece? Because as you said, if we are a collective and we all have a responsibility, best ideas can come from people who don't have any experience, right? I've had people who just started with, graduates and interns, and they go, hey, what if we do it this way? Because they got fresh eyes and fresh perspectives. You're like, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And you naturally take the credit for it. But what I want to know is how do we gear towards more of the positive, perhaps, in the risk environment?
I guess there's two aspects to the answer. One, if we run a risk workshop, people are really they're fabulous at coming forward with the negatives. They're not very good at coming forward with the positives. So I actually prefer to separate them, if I'm honest. Right, this week we're going to look at positives and we're going to look at opportunities and define again, so it's really clear in people's minds what is success on this project, and therefore what are the opportunities we can exploit to maximize the chance of achieving success, and just keep it as simple as that. And almost sometimes a blank sheet of paper is a good starting point. And I sort of alluded to it just a moment ago, but the makeup of risk teams, bringing people in, they may not have construction experience or infrastructure experience, but they might be super bright with master's degrees, and they do come in with a fresh set of eyes, and they start to pose questions that perhaps you and I and Dale, who've been around the block a few times, we may not think of that. So I think trying to think laterally a little bit more in terms of bringing in really bright people does make a difference.
Yeah, and I think I'd love to know, picking your brain now, that those ways of thinking, is there any mindset you get into? Like, is there any particular method you use? Whiteboards, blank pieces of paper, but how do you get people thinking about the positives if it isn't their natural inclination to do that?
Well, it depends on the audience, but if you're dealing with it, more often than not, if you can demonstrate that by coming up with opportunities, actually people are going to make greater margin, or you're going to finish earlier, or whatever it might be, and you just try and keep it simple. And you don't need to spend hours doing this. It can be a really focused hour on what are the opportunities, what are the key reasons that opportunity might come to fruition, how can we maximize those? It can be as simple as that. We don't need to go into massive amounts of detail and flowery words on an opportunity register. Let's keep it to the point that can make a difference. And let's be clear on, if we get 4 or 5 opportunities that come to fruition, that can have a significant effect.
Yeah, and those could be the best opportunities you ever take if you focus on it, as you say. I wanted to know, as you were chatting there, you were talking about communication, behaviors, and things like that impact projects. Have you found a way to, I guess, evaluate or capture the impact, the risk attached to poor behavior or poor communication? Because I feel like those soft skills need a way to be linked to performance of a project.
Yeah.
Have you found a way to do that and maybe capture it as a potential risk? Look, if we don't communicate effectively, this is the risk.
Yeah.
If we do, that's the opportunity.
so I think you have to look at those as opportunities. If you go to a team and say, look, you lot are bloody rubbish, and you've got to improve, well, that's going to be difficult. But if you couch it much more in terms of this is where we are now, and we have an opportunity to improve here, and this is the world-class level we're shooting at, people then are much more in tune with thinking, yeah, okay, we're going to go for that. So all those soft skill aspects, I always try and put those as opportunities on the register. And I think that really, it will drive success much more than just bashing them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. The better we can paint it and help people to accept it and actually drive it and I guess be accountable for their actions, then the better off. But talking of world class, you mentioned there you've worked on 2 Olympic Games. Now it's famous, right? Building Olympic stadiums, right? There's no budge on timescale. You have to hit the timescale, right?
Yeah.
But they're notorious for overspending, etc. What is it like working on Olympic Games compared to other projects? Is it very different, or is it actually not too different?
I'm going to pull you up on something you just said. I don't think they're notorious for overspending, actually, because if you look at a number of Olympic Games, you pretty much know they're going to cost you. We'll take Beijing out of the equation, but they're going to cost you 9 or 10 billion. Mm-hmm. I think LA is slightly different, the model they've got over there. But we'll use London as an example. Politics plays a part, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we have to pick up those pieces. HS2 is an example of that, of politics playing its part. So I think we in construction, and certainly in risk, have our fingers on the pulse much more on what the real outturn cost of projects is, but that perhaps isn't always reported up the ladder, which I guess I understand in a way, is sometimes these projects wouldn't ever come to fruition. What was the first part of the question? Sorry, Dale.
So it was more around the approach to risk. If it's particularly different when you have a hard and fast deadline to hit, does it change at all, or does it remain the same? You have the same approach?
I think it's the same approach. If I think back on London 2012 is a long time ago now, albeit it seems like yesterday. But the key driver on that project was always cost, really. That was the thing that was underpinning a lot of the decisions and how we move forwards. It was a given that time was needed, and we undertook schedule models, etc. But the key driver was really trying to make sure we brought it in as close to the reported cost as we could. And I guess it's staying focused on the present, isn't it? And also, it's about realism and truthfulness, and it's I think risk professionals, we have an obligation when we report things not to let those get pushed down, and whether it be directors or whoever it may be, to drive things down. If we are confident with what we've undertaken, then we should drive that forwards. And I'm certainly encouraging everybody in my team. We don't want shrinking violets. We want bright young people that aren't afraid to stand up in front of the board and challenge and critique and try and make a difference. Goes back to the point I was making earlier. We want them to be consultants, and potentially, I don't want them to specialise in a particular area, but if somebody is a specialist in risk on rail or risk in sport, then they will know much more about all the things that can go wrong and the outturn cost and the likely that are going to achieve the schedule than anybody else. So they should be strong and go for it.
Yeah, that's important to know. And I think as well, just on the mega project, I had done a bit of homework on these, that the Olympic Games, or particularly stadiums in the Olympic Games, are one of the most, apparently, and this is not me I'm citing, but one of the most, well, they are difficult, but they're one of the most riskiest and most expensive undertakings. And there's some pretty interesting stats out there. I don't know if you've listened or read any of Bent's stuff. Bent Flipberg. We've tried to get him on the podcast a few times. Shout out to Bent. He has done a few kind of deep discovery sessions around whether or not there's a basis for, or some type of correlation between them. You said you've been on, was it 2 Olympic Games? Was there any correlation between the two? Was there some consistent or common risks that you saw come out of those projects?
Yeah, there was some common risks. Certainly, I was involved in an early launch workshop for Rio, and bear in mind that they obviously speak Portuguese and I don't, so that I did have a translator. But we had 30 people in a room, and they were just astounded when I told them that this far out from the games, London had 500 people in the tower in Canary Wharf, and they had 30 people in a room that had never spoken to each other. So you could see the writing on the wall from the early days in Rio, what was going to happen. Yeah. Okay, they got there, but they were still painting the doors and things right at the last minute, weren't they? But I think many of the top risks are pertinent. And we certainly in AECOM, we have a database such that when we approach a project, we're going in, and I keep going on about this, but we go in there with these are the key risks that we think you're facing. Now that's not to say we get it 100% correct, but if you go into projects with knowing what are the key things that can make a difference, and the key risks, that's really powerful, I think. So anyway, it's fabulous being involved in a business like AECOM, where if somebody's working on a tower in Australia, we can tell them what the key risks were from the Shard or Leadenhall Tower, or the Twin Towers in New York. That's really powerful.
Well, this is one of the things that I think risk is useful for. I mean, if you talk about lessons learned and that kind of thing, and when you can draw parallels, and I know it is difficult to try and benchmark data. I think risk is one of those areas where you can. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think you can. I appreciate different projects have different aspects to them, and you need to be bespoke and understanding the causes. On one project might be different to another one, but nevertheless, it shouldn't be a blank sheet paper each time, should it? We should be able to go to know what are the key risks each time. And one of the things that we do as a business is, let's take, for an example, offshore wind farms. So my team, they pick a subject, offshore wind farms, they map what are the key risks on offshore wind farms. They read something in a newspaper, Financial Times, on something, they just note and they map them. So then after about a year, they've got a mind map, and that map, it covers risk, it covers challenges, it covers financial issues, etc. But it will tell you everything, not everything, but an awful lot of information about offshore wind farms. So young professionals in the team that are just starting out, they pick an area and they start to map those. And of course, that doesn't mean they have to stay in that area, but it's a really useful way of pictorially showing what makes a difference. And again, that informs the risk. So if somebody's going to work on an offshore wind farm, they're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. They've got a lot of the questions they should be asking, a lot of the challenges they should be posing is already there. They don't need to be 30 years of construction experience. They can have 5-6 years and really make a big difference.
Yeah, agree. And just one more, I think you kind of touched on visualizations of risks. You know, it used to be a spreadsheet up on the screen, and we would go there through line by line. And, you know, I guess from a marketing perspective, we could have done a little bit better. And, you know, back then it was okay, we were busy. But is there ways to excite people visually around risk? I mean, how can we make it sexy? Or can we?
I think it is sexy, isn't it?
Yeah, there we go. Hey, nice. Good work.
I think it's sexy if you focus on the risks that make a difference. And what I mean by that is, if you give somebody a risk register and they get halfway through the second risk, they can't understand what it says, and there's lots of flowery words, you've lost them, and you're probably not going to get that board director back tuned in with what you're trying to achieve. So I think really describing things to the point and really well, and making sure causes are to the point and clear and concise is something that more often than not doesn't happen. Mitigations actually mitigate the risk. More often than not, there are a bunch of flowery words that actually describe an aspect of somebody doing their job. Whereas if you actually have mitigations that address the causes of a risk or address the probability of it happening and keeping it simple like that, then I think you can see that it will actually make a difference in risk mitigation. So I guess I'm not sure many people would think, well, that's not my description of sexy, but if it makes a difference, then maybe it does. I think the mapping idea as well of showing, of linking it back to what drives success, people get that. So when they're looking at a register, they may not get it, but then when you show that a mind map, okay, these are the objectives that we've agreed, and are going to drive success on this project, and continually linking it back to that is important. And a key word there is continually doing it. So you might do it on day one. You've got to do that quite often, otherwise things move away from that and you end up with a register that's not relevant. So I think making sure we're addressing what success is.
Yeah, and I was thinking while you're talking, because we had Dave Snowden on some time back, and he was talking about sense making and having a map, like a topography map, right? And you had peaks and troughs and whatnot, and you could effectively make sense by saying we want more of that and less of this, or something like this. I'm paraphrasing him, obviously doing a very bad job at it. But I thought something that was visual, because we are, I guess, as projects professionals, we're moving to the more visual ways of working. I thought maybe it could be something like a topography map for risks or even opportunities. And you could use some type of sliding visualization for that. Have you seen anything that blows you away like that?
Well, I think the future of integrating it with BIM and modeling and showing different scenarios is really powerful. What if these collection of risks happen? What is the impact of that? Okay, we're going to tweak that, and showing really in a fast, clear way, okay, what is the impact of that? And if you can see it pictorially, that would really, really make a difference. I think that will really drive decision making and make decision making so much easier for complex projects.
Yeah, we could probably just have Dale on the side, just a little Pinocchio, and and as the risks get more broader, we could just have the nose grow. It's like, guys, settle down. These aren't real risks. Come on, sort them out. Because again, quality is important.
I don't know if I want him there.
Yeah, I don't know where you're going with that.
We were talking about sexiness, and then you bring him into it.
Yeah, I know. I think my Leica idea was better, Richard.
Leica?
No, I don't really want you in Leica either.
I must have dropped out when that happened. I would have told him off as well, Richard. Sorry. Well, Dale, over to you, mate.
Thanks, Val. Look, Richard, it's been amazing talking to you for the best part of an hour. But before we let you go, I have a quick pop quiz called Fiverr, and it's all about yourself. So if you're ready, if you've had enough swigs of wine there.
Right, okay, far away.
So question 1, steak, seafood, or salad?
Seafood.
Question 2, what are the 3 must-have behaviors you look for in successful project teams?
Communication, charisma, passion.
Lovely. Question 3, what is one piece of advice for people new to the project profession?
Be dynamic.
Be dynamic. I like that. Question 4. If you could go back to one moment of your life, what would it be and why?
Oh. I think I'd have done an MBA earlier. I was going to say not get married, but that's perhaps not relevant, is it?
Doing an MBA earlier, we'll take that. Question 5, moving on swiftly. Which superpower would you choose to have for a day and why? I mean, you've got plenty already from what you've done, but on top of those.
A superpower. I'd like to fly because I think you could see more of the world really, really quickly. And that would be fabulous.
Yeah, yeah. Be great. I'd love to fly too. Anyway, we can only dream about superpowers, can't we? But look, it's been amazing to have you, Richard. Thank you so much for your time. Before we let you go, any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
No, not really. I guess just for young professionals out there, I think they should view risk as something that is really important to making a difference on projects. And you can be the person that you have the knowledge, you have the power, you can go and say the things and ask those questions that other people dare not ask. And I think that's quite a beautiful thing about risk. Because when I've done that, people come up to you and say, yeah, I was thinking about asking that question, but I didn't really want to say it. And okay, sometimes you might get it wrong, but 9 times out of 10, you'll make a difference. So yeah, back yourself and go for it.
Fantastic, fantastic advice. And we do need to give a shout out to Farrow Uller. Thank you so much, Farrow, for putting Richard in touch with us. It's been amazing to have him on. And also 2 other lovely risk professionals, Charlotte Candy and Claudina Castelli. Shout out to you too as well. Val, any final thoughts from you?
No, I think it was great to actually talk about endurance first and then link in risk. Richard, it's a pleasure to have you. Obviously, we'd love to pick your brain again, so you're welcome back anytime. And yeah, thanks for keeping risk sexy. Appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you very much.
And keep keeping it sexy, Richard. We love it. Well, folks, that is all we have time for. Remember, if you do like what you've heard on this episode, please do share it on your social media and help us pay it forward. A massive thank you once again to our guest, Richard Newey, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.